Our next presenter took me by surprise. We had an open mic several months ago across the street at the church when this room was being renovated, and one of the presenters was Ben Fortier. He's always been our videographer working for TCAM, but I had no idea that he was a poet. And he got up and read one of his poems that was based on his experience as a Marine serving in combat, and it just, the power in it stunned me. So I was so grateful when he agreed to be a feature today. Ben is not only a poet and an ex-Marine, but he's also a photographer and a musician. Can you imagine? Lovely. And in addition to that, he's a lovely person. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ethel. I really appreciate everything that you've done to make this happen, and obviously everybody here at the museum, Saria, Katie, they just make it all happen, and this is fantastic. So I'd like to first just, you're not looking at a defense expert or a political science degree recipient. I've done my time in a combat zone, as Ethel said, but my true passion is in art, sociology, and history. Along the way, I've been branded a Renaissance man or an old soul, obviously not in the face, though. So, to pay the bills, broadcast media has always been my calling. I'm very grateful to be working for Taunton Community Access and Media. Public access media allows events like this to get over the airwaves and to our preferred viewing devices. This is yet another extension of our First Amendment rights, and for that we should be grateful. So, thank you for TCAM. War and combat have gotten so many men high that I unscientifically believe it is connected to the deepest roots of our primal instincts. When two individuals meet on a field of battle, there is an aura of godliness among them. The survivors of violence walk away with a feeling of grace and blessing while simultaneously commiserating the sacrifice of their comrades. They have cheated death, and they will see another battle as long as their bodies and their minds endure. The world has long been familiar and comfortable with warfare. Many cultures have reveled in it. To this day, it is considered an honor for one to kill or get killed in combat, regardless of who you're fighting against. My first piece today is called 1918, about World War I. This was a point in time when machine guns became efficient enough to spew rounds at thousands per second. Woven into fields of fire with other machine guns, men would fall by the dozens. This was never seen before in history at the time. Artillery cannons were so large that they had to be transported via rail and could shoot 400-pound shells from distances almost unheard of at that time. Chemicals were launched on battlefields, causing men to die obscenely gruesome deaths, often choking on their own fluids building up in their lungs. The sheer brutality of this war is often overshadowed by its sequel, World War II. But I've been absolutely fascinated by the First World War as of late, and hope this piece may add some insight to the struggle of the foot soldiers that may have been involved in any one of those battles in Europe, but especially our American foot soldiers who joined so late in the war. This is called 1918. The Yanks slogged through the German lines, delivering hate and discontent to the Hun in the form of hand grenades and accurate rifle fire. For years prior, the French and German commanders used tactics from previous wars while modern technology entered the fray. The European nations had locked each other in a stalemate, bodies piled in the millions, and an entire continent was racked in despair and grief. Hope seemed to be fleeting as each day of the Great War passed. In an effort to bring a quick end to the war, the Americans adopted an aggressive stance, hunting down the enemy and bringing the fight to them, persevering through brutal, vicious methods. Some men would beat their enemy to death with a rifle, shovel, helmet. A ferocious and hardened enemy found themselves intimidated and shaken. On this centennial of the end of the Great War, let us mirror the past and recognize the fighting spirit of American citizens, many of whom have traveled to distant lands, never to be seen or heard from again. When we think of wars, we often disregard those that are displaced in wars. I read a story about refugees in Syria, and I wrote a poem based on that, what I think that experience might be like. This is called Emaciated Beyond Recognition. Eyes flutter open after hours of broken sleep. For a still moment, the harshness of life is in retreat. But like the wolf stalking its dying meal, waves of pain flood over this broken body, sharp and stabbing, the teeth shred through flesh. Writhing and withering, struggling to justify hope, surrounded by the frail bodies of our family, frozen in the position in which they passed, reaching out for one last meal or a way out of this hell. Too frail to move their corpses, we look away from them in great shame. Soon the vultures will pick them apart. The soil is filled with blood. Chemicals killed every living thing that was green, this black and white world. Bombed out structures used as morgues and sanctuaries, this black and white world, in which nothing will ever grow again. The pangs of hunger, a wretched torment, as the world watches through digital eyes. Empathy is hardened into disgust. So easy to turn away from this horror at the press of a switch. Eyes slowly closing on this colorless world for a period of broken sleep. This next one is called Far From Home. I don't expect you guys to clap. This is nothing to be clapping about, but just moving on, I'm just going to kind of transition. This is heavy stuff, so please feel free to, just take it as it is. This is called Far From Home. Creatures display flagrant forms of aggression in an attempt to shake the winds, boasting about conflicts they viewed and were never part of, as if they understood violence to its very core, as if they could recreate the pulsating, beating heart that squirms from the jaws of the reptile. Displays of memory adorn the cavern walls, pointy sticks that become swords, swords that become rifles. Hesitant to take another man's life, yet on the other hand, the grip of shame that comes with murder. I feel nothing, he lies to himself and his God. The real world feels so far away. What motivates a man to cut the throats of beggars? What drives a woman to hurl herself upon jagged stones? Humanity's viciousness is proudly adorned. Compassion is found between the cracks of rifles. They weep as they drag away their dead. They laugh as they gun down the enemy in close proximity. It's the last four lines of that poem that I think really kind of bring it home. It's a little, I don't really have a style, as many of you could probably kind of tell. It's just kind of free-flowing type of stuff. But it's those last four lines that really, on the one hand, this person, we can see them in our mind's eye, dragging away their friend who was just killed or blown up or maimed, and they're crying as they pull them away. And then, and maybe in the same day or within the same hour, they're back in the fight and engaging with the enemy and trying to, as we could see, I read about it a little bit in my second to last poem. It's called The Battle of Ganjgal, which I'll get to that, but it kind of explains what your mind really must go through to be in a hellacious situation like that. This is called Lead the Way. It's basically an ode to our high-risk operators, our special forces who are, we don't realize what they're doing, but they are, basically taking the fight to bad guys out in the world. So this is an ode to them. Lead the way. Sweat lingers in the fabric, adding grams of weight to the swiftly moving operator. They move in teams of two, silently approaching the target area. The night envelops them, shrouding their outline, their heightened senses feeling the environment, feeding off violence. A break in the silence as triggers click back. Enemy bodies fall, slumped against the walls, like foxes moving with cunning and confidence, slipping through the target area, gathering intelligence, pictures, documents, laptops, then disappearing back into the murky air, taken away by mechanical birds whose rotors chop away the clouds as they ascend into the heavens to return once again when the moon is full. This next one, I grew up in as Ethel said, I like music a lot, so I just kind of grew up listening to a lot of music. And When I was growing up, the music that I was listening to was very heavily influenced by like punk rock. Punk rock was kind of fading at the time, but there was a lot of music where the lyrics were very gritty and you know, kind of F you to society, that type of thing. So this was I kind of went for that type of feeling in this. This is a reflection on how great our society is, and yet how high our depression and suicide rates are. We're the richest nation in the world, yet if you look at the numbers, you know, we're the most depressed and highest, very high suicide, murder rates, things like that. So this is called the first world, the worst world. It's a very cynical view on things. Sit up, take stock, realize life barely getting by. Monotony, tribulation, introspection, desperation. Bank account is full, bills are paid on time, house is nice and clean, yet life is full of grime. Cut off, fading fast, happiness too abstract, lethargy, depression, solitude, isolation. Kids are all grown up, the past is far away, searching for a reason to make it through today. First world, worst world, drowning in wealth, no concept of self, morals aligned with the bottom line. This, I got a couple more. Appreciate everyone's attention today. This is a long one. It's called Broken at Ganjgal. It's based on a story that I heard. It's a true story. The Medal of Honor recipient Dakota Meyer was in Afghanistan, and he basically got credited for this operation that went completely awry. So the poem tells the story, basically. It's called Broken at Ganjgal. The wash of the Kiowa helicopter's rotors gently caress the beard of the fallen Afghan soldier as it hovers above the village, spraying enemy positions to keep their heads down. There was no support as promised. There was no artillery as discussed. Clandestine operation is what the leadership insisted, winning hearts and minds, while ignoring tactical procedures that kept Marines safe and the Afghan soldiers motivated to fight. Dehydrated and physically mangled, they held each other up as they exited the battlefield, shaking their heads as they watched Marines and soldiers move in to the kill zone, knowing they would most certainly die. Combat strength had been compromised by sheer will and grit alone. They sauntered into the valleys of death, engaging the enemy at close range, snuffing out life, laughing as bodies fall, grasping the last edge of sanity. For when the human mind realizes that the physical plane is disgusting, horrific, and deadly, emotional capacity is limited as to save the mind from completely overloading on the trauma that surrounds them. After hours of seemingly endless fighting, the village became desolate, enemy fighters extracting their wounded over the invisible border in which none would cross. The momentum of that day continued for weeks on end. They would return to observe, harass, and kill until all foreign entities would evacuate and leave that place for eternity. Thank you so much for everyone's attention. This is going to be my last one today. Do I have enough time? Just like a minute. All right, perfect, great. This is called This Crushing Human Condition. You can find some of my work. I have photography and things like that. As Ethel said, I have a website, benjaminfortier.com. I post things here and there every few months. So please feel free to go on my website. And, I try and have like public domain stuff on there as well. So thanks everyone for your attention. This is going to be the last one for today from me. This crushing human condition. Like tales of olden times, we relive moments that have passed us by, reflections of memories, fractions of existence, insisting that our lives are unidirectional. I do not know of fate or destiny. There are prophecies and wisdom beyond the reach of understanding. We conquer this physical plane, yet allow our mind's eye to endure searing pain, suffering at the calloused hands of a society that mocks our independence. Untold beauty sits within our hearts. Unknown strength waits beyond our core. No gym in existence can train us for the grueling trials that await us. Endurance will triumph. And as the valleys dip into the darkest places, we are alone with ourselves. You support my existence while I journey in solitude. Your memory is a beacon of hope. And I pray we shall reclaim our lives in the glory of the sun moon, and stars. Thank you all. Appreciate it.